The night was calm, and the stars shone brighter than usual over the quiet mountain valley. Daniel stood beside his small radio telescope, adjusting the controls with care. Astronomy was not just a hobby for him. It was his escape from the noise and rush of city life. Up here, the air was fresh, the silence was deep, and the sky felt endless. He loved the way the stars seemed to tell stories, each tiny light a world of its own. It was just past midnight when Daniel noticed a sudden flash of light in the corner of his eye. At first, he thought it was a meteor, a quick, brilliant streak across the sky that would vanish in seconds. But this light didn't vanish. Instead, it slowed down. His brow furrowed as he adjusted the telescope to follow it. The object shimmered faintly, its color shifting between silver and pale blue, and then it descended lower, cutting through thin layers of clouds with unusual grace. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. Meteors didn't slow down. Satellites didn't move like that either. Whatever it was heading straight toward the valley. He grabbed his flashlight and began walking toward the spot where he guessed it might land. The path was rocky, and his boots crunched over dry leaves. The night seemed to grow quieter with each step, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. A faint hum reached his ears, a strange vibration in the air, soft yet powerful. When he finally reached the clearing, the sight before him made him freeze. There, half hidden in the mist, stood a tall figure unlike any human he had ever seen. She was wearing a suit of armor that gleamed under the moonlight, marked with lines and symbols that glowed faintly. The armor looked both ancient and advanced, as if it carried the weight of centuries yet was made with technology beyond anything on Earth. She was a woman, though her height and presence made her seem more like a statue carved from some alien stone. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, locked onto his, and for a moment Daniel felt as though she could see straight into his thoughts. Neither of them moved. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of something metallic, like heated steel. Daniel felt the urge to say something, but no words came. She didn't raise any weapon, though he noticed a long, sharp, spear-like tool strapped to her back. Instead, she simply stood there, watching him, her face expressionless, yet filled with a strange kind of searching. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and steady, with an accent unlike anything he had heard. The words were not entirely in English, but he could understand parts of them, enough to realize she was not asking for harm. It sounded like she wanted to know where she was, perhaps testing if he could even understand her. I think you've landed in the wrong place, Daniel said, his voice shaking slightly. This is Earth, a small part of it. She tilted her head, studying him carefully, as though his response revealed more than just words. Her gaze swept over his clothes, his flashlight, and the telescope case he had slung over his shoulder. Slowly, she stepped forward, her movements controlled and deliberate, like someone trained to be ready for danger at any second. Daniel's first instinct was to back away, but something stopped him. There was no hostility in her body language, only a cautious curiosity. Her armor caught the moonlight with every step, and he could see tiny marks on it, like scratches and dents, telling him she had seen battle. When she was only a few feet away, Daniel could feel the strength in her presence. She was not only taller than him, but also carried herself like a leader, someone who had commanded others and fought to survive. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment it felt like she was deciding whether to trust him. The silence stretched, until she finally gave the faintest nod. She reached into a small pouch on her belt and pulled out a small device that projected a faint, blue holographic image of a star map. She pointed to one glowing point on the map, then to herself, and then made a gesture toward the sky. "You're not from here," Daniel said softly, though it was obvious. "You came from out there." She didn't answer directly, but the look in her eyes confirmed it. Something inside Daniel shifted. He realized he wasn't just looking at a visitor. He was looking at someone who might be stranded, far from home, perhaps with no one to help her. And yet, she wasn't asking for help outright. She was simply watching him, as if waiting to see what kind of human he was before revealing more. For a long while, they stood under the moonlit sky, two strangers from worlds apart. Daniel had so many questions: who she was, why she had come, what had happened to her. But he sensed it wasn't time to ask them yet. Instead, he simply stayed still, letting her see that he wasn't a threat. Somewhere in that silent exchange, a fragile thread of understanding began to form between them. Little did Daniel know this was only the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives forever. Daniel didn't sleep that night. After the strange meeting in the clearing, he had guided the tall alien woman to his small cabin at the edge of the valley. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a shed, but it was warm, and the soft yellow light from the lamps made it feel less like the middle of nowhere. She followed him silently, her eyes scanning everything, as if she was making sure it was safe. When they stepped inside, she paused at the doorway. For a moment, Daniel thought she might refuse to enter, but then she stepped in, her armored boots making a faint metallic sound on the wooden floor. He gestured toward a chair, and she sat stiffly, still alert. "I guess I should start with introductions," Daniel said nervously. "My name's Daniel." She didn't reply right away. Instead, she touched her chest lightly and spoke a single word. "Zara." Her voice had a steady, almost commanding tone, yet there was a calmness underneath. Daniel repeated her name to make sure he got it right, and she gave a slight nod. Over the next hour, they tried to talk, though it wasn't easy. Zara spoke in short sentences, sometimes mixing words from her own language with English. She seemed to understand more than she could say. Daniel figured out that she had learned some human languages, but probably not in a classroom. More, like from intercepted signals or data. He offered her water, which she accepted, examining the glass before drinking. She seemed to study everything he did, how he poured the water, how he moved, even the way he handled the kettle when he made tea for himself. Bit by bit, Daniel learned more. Zara was a warrior, part of a group tasked with defending her world from invaders. She didn't share all the details, but he could tell the battles had been brutal. The marks on her armor were not just from one fight. They were from years of conflict. When he asked about her ship, her expression darkened. She explained that it was damaged beyond quick repair. Something had happened during a fight in orbit around a planet she called Varian. She had been chased, and in the process of escaping, she had fallen into a wormhole-like anomaly that sent her across light years, straight to Earth. Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions: excitement, curiosity, and concern. Here was someone who had traveled through the stars, who had seen worlds he couldn't even imagine. But she was also alone, stranded, and probably in danger. Over the next few days, Zara stayed near the cabin. Daniel showed her basic things about Earth life, how to use the small stove, how to read a simple map, even how to understand some human measurements. She learned quickly, her sharp mind picking up patterns almost instantly. In return, she shared small glimpses of her own culture. She told him about her people's honor code. Warriors like her were bound by a set of rules that valued loyalty, courage, and the protection of the innocent. To betray these rules was considered worse than defeat in battle. Daniel could see how deeply she lived by this code. It was in the way she carried herself, the way she never let her guard down completely. Sometimes, in the evenings, they would sit outside. Daniel would point out constellations, telling her their names and the old stories humans had given them. Zara listened quietly, occasionally asking questions. One night he noticed her looking at the stars not with wonder, but with a kind of longing. "You miss your home," Daniel said softly. Zara didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on the sky, her violet gaze fixed on something far away. "Yes," she finally said, her voice low. "But my home may not be the same when I return." Those words lingered in Daniel's mind. He realized she wasn't just lost. She was uncertain if she would even recognize the place she once fought for. Slowly, they began to trust each other more. Zara no longer stood at a distance when they talked. She would sometimes help Daniel with small repairs around the cabin using tools with skill and precision. She could fix a broken hinge in minutes or reinforce a wall with techniques Daniel had never seen before. Yet for all her strength, there were moments when she seemed tired, almost fragile. Once, Daniel caught her staring at a small photograph. On his desk, a picture of him and his late father, taken years ago. She didn't ask about it, but the look in her eyes suggested she understood loss in her own way. On the fourth day, a light rain began to fall. They stayed indoors, and Daniel decided to try and cook something simple: vegetable soup. Zara watched carefully as he chopped vegetables, almost as if she was memorizing the process. When he handed her a spoon to taste, she hesitated before trying it. Her expression remained unreadable, but she finished the bowl without a word. It was that night, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, that Daniel noticed a change in her. She seemed less guarded. Her shoulders weren't as stiff, and when he spoke, she met his eyes for longer. He realized that maybe she had begun to believe he truly meant no harm. Still, he knew there were things she wasn't telling him. Her arrival on Earth wasn't just a random accident. There had been a battle, enemies, and a chase. If she had enemies capable of crossing space, then her being here could put them both at risk. But for now, Daniel decided not to press. Trust, he knew, was not something you demanded. It was something you earned moment by moment. In those quiet days, the cabin in the valley became more than a shelter. It became a place where two beings from completely different worlds learned to see each other as more than strangers. Neither of them knew that soon an event would change everything between them. The days in the valley passed slowly, each one carrying a quiet rhythm. Daniel began to notice the small changes in Zara's behavior. She no longer kept her spear strapped to her back inside the cabin. She started asking short questions about the things he did, how he cooked, why humans built houses from wood instead of metal, why he sometimes stared at the stars without speaking. Zara had a way of watching him that made him feel like every movement he made was being studied. But it didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt as though she was trying to understand him, not just his actions, but the reasons behind them. One evening, after a long day of repairing part of the old shed, Daniel decided they could use a break. The air was crisp, and the sky was unusually clear. He grabbed a blanket, his small telescope, and motioned for Zara to follow him to a flat area on the hillside behind the cabin. "This," Daniel said as they settled on the blanket, "is my favorite spot to watch the stars." She looked around, as if measuring the area for safety, before finally sitting down beside him. Her armor was gone tonight. She wore a simple, dark suit that still looked far more advanced than anything on Earth. He adjusted the telescope, then stepped back. "Here," he said, gesturing for her to look. Zara leaned down, her long fingers steady as she adjusted the lens slightly. Daniel watched her face, curious about what she might think of seeing the universe through human equipment. She spent a few moments in silence, then straightened and looked up at the sky directly. "Your world, small," she said slowly, searching for the right words. "But sky, same." Daniel smiled at that. "Same sky, different homes." For a while they sat quietly. Daniel began pointing out constellations: Orion, Cassiopeia, the Pleiades cluster. He told her how ancient humans had made stories about the stars, naming them after heroes, queens, hunters, and animals. She listened, with a thoughtful expression, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight. After some time, she spoke, her voice softer than usual. "We have stories too, but our stars, they change. Wars destroy some. Others fade." Daniel felt a weight in her words. To her, the night sky was not just beautiful. It was also a reminder of loss. He hesitated, then asked, "Is that why you left your world? Because of the war?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow breath and said, "I did not leave. I was sent away. Mission to protect my people's way of life. But I failed." Her hands tightened slightly on her knees. "Many gone. I could not save them all." Daniel didn't know what to say. He wasn't a soldier. He had never fought in any war. But he could hear the pain in her voice. "You did what you could," he said gently. "Sometimes, that's all anyone can do." Zahra turned to look at him, her gaze intense. "Others do not see it that way. They see only the ones I could not save." Daniel held her gaze, feeling the heaviness of her words. "Then they don't understand you," he said quietly. Something shifted in her expression, just a small flicker, but enough to tell him he had touched something deep. The wind rustled through the grass around them, carrying the scent of pine. Zahra's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she leaned back, looking up at the stars again. Then, without looking at him, she said in a steady, almost hesitant tone, "You are the only one who understands me, human." The words hung in the air, heavier than the stillness of the night. Daniel felt them settle inside him, warm and unexpected. He turned to her, but she kept her eyes on the sky, as if she hadn't just said something that could change the way they saw each other. For a long time, he didn't speak. Part of him wanted to respond right away, to tell her that he wanted, to understand her more, that he wanted to know everything she had been through. But he also sensed that this was a rare and delicate moment. Pushing too hard might break it. So instead, he said softly, "Then I'll keep trying to understand. You, Zahra, as long as you're here." Her head turned slightly toward him, and though her face remained calm, there was the faintest trace of relief in her eyes. The two of them sat in silence for the rest of the night, the stars above seeming brighter than before. For the first time, since she had arrived, Zahra didn't look like a warrior carrying the weight of a battlefield on her shoulders. She looked like someone who had found, if only for a moment, a place where she didn't have to fight. Daniel didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if her enemies would find her or if she would leave when her ship was fixed. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just a stranger to her anymore, and deep down he realized he didn't want to go back to a life without her presence. The peaceful days in the valley did not last. Daniel first noticed the change one night when the air felt different. It wasn't the weather, no clouds, no storm, but something in the atmosphere seemed heavier, like the stillness before, a clap of thunder. Zahra sensed it too. She had been sitting near the fireplace, sharpening a small blade when she froze mid-motion. Her head tilted slightly, and her eyes narrowed toward the window. "What is it?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice low. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, every movement controlled and tense. "They are here," she finally said. Daniel's stomach dropped. He didn't need to ask who they were. Without another word, Zahra moved to the corner where she had kept her armor. In seconds, she was fastening the plates over her arms and chest, each piece clicking into place with quiet precision. Daniel had seen her wear the armor before, but now, watching the speed and focus in her movements, he realized just how practiced she was. This wasn't just protection. It was second nature to her. "Daniel," she said firmly, You must hide. He shook his head. I'm not leaving you out there alone. Her gaze snapped to him, and for a moment he thought she might argue. But instead, she gave a short nod, as if accepting his choice. Then stay close. Listen to what I say. They stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon cast pale light over the valley, but it wasn't the moon that caught Daniel's eye. It was the faint, flickering glows in the distance, moving in a way no lantern or vehicle could. Zara's hand went to the hilt of her spear. "Scouts," she murmured. The lights drew nearer until Daniel could make out the shapes of sleek, angular craft hovering above the tree line. They moved silently, but their presence made the ground hum faintly under his feet. One of the crafts shone a beam of pale blue light over the trees, scanning methodically. Zara's voice was sharp but quiet. "We must move. They will search every corner." They slipped into the shadow of the hillside, moving quickly but carefully. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, and every crack of a twig under his boots felt too loud. Zara moved like a shadow, herself guiding him with quick hand gestures. She seemed to know exactly where to step to avoid making noise. Suddenly, a beam of light swept toward them. Zara reacted instantly, pulling Daniel down behind a large boulder. The beam passed over their hiding spot and moved on. "They know I am here," she whispered. "They will not stop." Daniel wanted to ask why they were after her, but now wasn't the time. The humming grew louder. One of the crafts descended into the clearing near his cabin. Daniel could see figures emerging from its sides, tall, armored beings with narrow helmets that glowed faintly. Their armor was different from Zara's, darker and sharper, almost insect-like in design. Zara motioned for him to stay hidden, then slipped out from behind the boulder. Her spear extended with a quick metallic sound, glowing faintly along the edges. She didn't charge blindly. She circled around the clearing, staying in the shadows until one of the enemy soldiers strayed too far from the others. With a swift, silent move, she struck, the spear hitting the soldier's armor with a crack that made Daniel flinch. The soldier fell, stunned, before he could even make a sound, but the others noticed almost instantly. Strange, high-pitched calls rang out, and the soldiers spread into formation, scanning the area. "Daniel!" Zara's voice was sharp now. "Run to the trees! Go!" He hesitated, looking at her battling two enemies at once. Her movements were fast, precise, each strike aimed to disable, not kill, but there were more of them than he could count. Sparks lit up the clearing as her spear clashed with their weapons. Then he saw one soldier aiming a strange device at her from behind. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and ran forward, swinging it hard into the soldier's arm. The blow wasn't strong enough to knock the weapon away completely, but it was enough to throw off his aim. Zara turned sharply, finished the fight with one final strike, and then grabbed Daniel's arm. "You stay close now," she ordered, pulling him into the tree line. They moved deeper into the forest, weaving through the dark. The sounds of pursuit followed them. Metallic footsteps, bursts of strange energy, and the constant hum of the hovering crafts. Daniel's lungs burned, but Zara never slowed. Even when a beam of light swept over them, she shifted them behind a thick tree at just the right moment. It was as if she could predict their movements before they happened. After what felt like hours, they finally reached a small ravine hidden under thick branches. Zara led him down into it, then crouched low, her breathing steady despite the chase. "They will search for some time," she said quietly, "but they will not find us here." Daniel leaned against the rocks, catching his breath. You saved me back there." Her expression softened just a little. "We saved each other," she said simply. For a moment, there was silence except for the distant hum of the enemy crafts moving away. Zara lowered her spear, her shoulders relaxing slightly, though her eyes still scanned the darkness. Daniel realized then that she hadn't just been protecting herself during the fight. She had been protecting him too, even when it put her at greater risk. And he, without thinking, had done the same for her. The trust between them, once fragile, now felt solid, earned in the fire of danger. But deep inside, Daniel knew this was only a pause. If her enemies could find her once, they could do it again, and next time they might not be so lucky. The night after the attack was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Daniel and Zara stayed in the hidden ravine until the morning light began to filter through the leaves. The enemy crafts had gone, but both of them knew they hadn't given up the search. When they finally returned to the cabin, the place looked different. The grass in the clearing was scorched in patches where energy blasts had hit. The side wall of the shed had been splintered, and the smell of burnt wood still hung in the air. Daniel felt a knot in his chest. It wasn't just a building, it was his home. And now it felt like it had been marked by something dangerous. Zara walked through the clearing slowly, scanning every trace of the fight. She touched the damaged wall, then turned to Daniel. "I cannot stay," she said quietly. Daniel had known this moment would come, but hearing the words still felt like a blow. "You mean you're leaving Earth?" She nodded once. "They know I am here. If I remain, they will keep coming. I will not put your world in danger." He wanted to argue, to tell her that maybe they could hide, that Earth was big and they could disappear somewhere else. But the look in her eyes told him she had already made her decision. Over the next few days, Zara worked with intense focus, repairing a small, sleek craft she had hidden deep in the forest. Daniel hadn't even known it was there. She had kept it out of sight, waiting until she could gather enough parts to make it flight-ready again. Some parts came from her damaged ship, others she had made from Earth materials in ways Daniel didn't fully understand. Daniel helped where he could, handing her tools and holding panels in place as she worked. Sometimes, when she was deep in concentration, he would catch himself studying her, not just her skill with technology, but the calm, steady way she moved, the patience in her hands. He realized he had learned a lot from her in these short weeks. Not just about her world, but about strength, loyalty, and trust. On the last evening, the craft was ready. The sun had dipped low, painting the valley in shades of gold and pink. The forest was quiet except for the faint hum of the ship's systems. As Zara checked the controls, Daniel stood a few steps away, unsure of what to say. His throat felt tight. "So, this is it?" She turned toward him, her armor gleaming faintly in the fading light. "For now," she said. He almost smiled at that. "For now" was better than forever. Zara stepped closer, stopping, just in front of him. For a moment, she simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out and placed her hand lightly against his chest, right over his heart. Her hand was warm through the fabric of his shirt. In her own language, she spoke a phrase Daniel couldn't understand. The words were soft, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "What does that mean?" he asked. She met his eyes. "It means you are part of my story now." Daniel felt a rush of emotion that left him silent. They stood there for a few long moments, neither of them moving. Then Zara stepped back, her usual composure returning. She climbed into the craft, the controls lighting up under her touch. The ship's engines began to hum more strongly, sending ripples of air through the grass. As the craft lifted slowly from the ground, Daniel raised a hand. Zara's violet eyes stayed on him until the ship rose above the tree line. Then, with a soft burst of light, it vanished into the sky, leaving only the quiet rustle of leaves in its wake. For a long time after, Daniel stood in the clearing, staring at the empty sky. He knew she was somewhere out there, returning to a world he couldn't imagine, facing dangers he couldn't see. But he also knew something else. She would remember him, just as he would remember her. And maybe someday the warrior alien woman who once told him, "You are the only one who understands me," would find her way back to this small valley on Earth.